Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You're here because you want deep knowledge, fast. And our mission is to give you that shortcut, to pull the most vital insights from really dense material so you can be, well, instantly in the know.
And today, we are taking the ultimate dive. We're going right into the architecture of your own mind.
We're pulling directly from the research that basically defined modern behavioral economics, really digging into human judgment through the concepts in thinking fast and slow.
Right, and the goal here, as the author puts it, it's not just theory. It's about giving you a richer vocabulary to talk about the mistakes and choices people make.
The intelligent gossip, he calls it.
Exactly, intelligent gossip that, hopefully encourages a little bit of self-criticism in all of us.
And this whole framework, it all started with a friendship, right? A debate between Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They weren't even looking for flaws in the human mind at first.
No, not at all. They were just debating a pretty core assumption. Are people, generally good intuitive statisticians?
And they thought, maybe.
They started with a qualified yes, but they very quickly had to change that to a firm qualified no. And the fascinating part is, it started with their own mistakes.
They looked at themselves.
Yes, they realized they were constantly, and I mean consistently, too willing to believe research that was based on, frankly, inadequate evidence, especially results from very small samples.
And that's one thing if you or I make that mistake. But they then went out and surveyed their own colleagues.
Expert colleagues, we're talking statisticians, people who literally write the textbooks on this stuff, and they found the exact same problem.
Wow.
The experts all dramatically exaggerated the likelihood that an experiment could be replicated if it was based on just a little bit of data. They were all trusting these tiny, consistent patterns that were really just random chance.
If even the experts get it wrong.
That was the launching pad. If they couldn't trust their gut on statistics, they needed a model for why. And that led right to the core framework you need to get. The mind is basically split into two operating systems.
Okay, so here's the setup. You probably believe your mind works in a really orderly, conscious way. That's what we'll call System 2.
But the surprise, the real truth, is that most of your thoughts, your feelings, your impulses, they just appear. You don't know how they got there. That's System 1, and it is running most of the show. So let's officially define these two characters. System 1 is, well, it's automatic, it's effortless, involuntary.
It's a part of you that sees a face and instantly knows who it is. Or completes the phrase bread and
butter. Or knows 2 + 2 is 4. You don't have to think about it. You don't mobilize any real attention. It just happens.
And System 2 is the supervisor, the deliberate, effortful thinker. This is the system you have to fire up for the heavy lifting.
Like trying to calculate 17 times 24 in your head?
I'm not even going to try.
Or comparing 2 different products, or, and this is critical, exercising self-control. It's supposed to monitor and overrule System 1's impulses. We tend to think of System 2 as us, our conscious self.
But the problem, and this is a big one, is the illusion of control. System 1 is so autonomous you can't just turn it off.
You can't. The classic example here is the Miller-Lyer illusion. You know the one, the 2 horizontal lines with the fins on the end?
All right, one looks way longer than the other.
It does. Now, your System 2, your rational mind, can grab a ruler, measure the lines, and know with absolute certainty they are the exact same length. You know the truth.
But you still see one as longer.
You still see it. You cannot decide to see them as equal. The best you can do is have System 2 remember the ruler and sort of manually overrule that persistent impression from System 1.
And System 1 is always talking to System 2, sending these little signals about what's going on.
It is. This is communicated through what's called cognitive ease versus cognitive strain. Ease just means everything's good, things are familiar, no threats detected. System 1 is happy.
And strain is the alarm bell.
Strain means something is off, vigilance is needed, the task is hard.
The really counterintuitive thing, though, is what happens when you deliberately induce that strain. You'd think that making something harder to read would make you worse at it.
Right. But these studies show that if you give people a really challenging logic puzzle, like the cognitive reflection test, and you print it in a fuzzy, barely legible font, they actually do better.
That is just, it's a wild finding. Why?
Because the difficulty, that cognitive strain, it's a signal. It forces the lazy System 2 to wake up and actually pay attention. It stops it from just accepting the quick, easy, and usually wrong answer that System 1 spits out first.
So System 2 is fundamentally lazy.
It operates on the law of least effort. It has this shared pool of mental energy, and when you use it for self-control or hard thinking, it gets tired. It's a real physical drain. The term is ego depletion.
And this isn't just a lab finding. It has horrifying implications in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. Look at that study of Israeli parole judges. The default decision, the easy one when you're tired, is just to say no, denial.
And the researchers found that their decision-making was directly tied to lunch.
It was. Right after a food break, when they were refreshed, approval rates for parole would spike, up to 65%.
But then you just watch the clock.
As the hours wore on, as they got more depleted and hungry, the approval rate just steadily dropped and dropped. Until right before the next meal, it was almost zero. Your fate literally depended on the judge's blood sugar level.
So when System 2 gets tired, it just gives up. It lets System 1 take the easy way out.
Exactly. It reverts to the path of least resistance. Every single time.
So if System 2 is so easily exhausted, how does System 1 handle all the complicated questions life throws at us?
It cheats. It uses mental shortcuts or heuristics, and the core mechanism is something called substitution.
It swaps a hard question for an easy one.
It does, and you don't even notice. So if you're faced with a really difficult target question, something like, how much would I contribute to save an endangered species?
That's a hard question.
It is. So System 1 might unconsciously swap it for an easier heuristic question, like, how much emotion do I feel when I think of dying dolphins? You answer the easy emotional question, and you feel like you've answered the hard logical one.
And one of the biggest of these shortcuts is representativeness, which is basically the stereotype trap.
It really is. The classic example is the Steve the librarian problem.
Okay, lay it on me.
The scenario is this. Steve is described as shy, withdrawn, helpful, but not very interested in people. He needs order, he's tidy, has a passion for detail. Now, is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer?
Well, my System 1 is screaming librarian. It's a perfect match for the stereotype.
It is. And in that moment, your System 1 has committed a massive logical error. It has completely ignored the statistical reality, the base rate.
Which is?
The statistical fact is that in the U.S., there are more than 20 male farmers for every one male librarian. So even if a tiny fraction of farmers fit Steve's description, they would still vastly outnumber the librarians. Statistically, he's far, far more likely to be a farmer.
But we ignore that 20-to-1 number.
Completely. We rely only on the resemblance, the stereotype. A coherent story is just more compelling than a dry statistic.
Okay, so that's one shortcut. What's the next big one?
Availability. This is where we judge how frequent or likely something is based purely on how easily examples come to mind.
The easier it is to remember, the more common we think it is.
Exactly. So if you get the impression that, say, politicians have more affairs than doctors or lawyers, that's almost certainly the availability heuristic.
Because we hear about it more in the news.
Way more. The media makes those stories incredibly available in your memory, so you overestimate the frequency.
And this can spiral out of control, right? Into what's called an availability cascade.
It's a self-sustaining cycle. A dramatic media story about a pretty low probability risk, maybe a specific chemical spill or a type of attack, catches public attention. That creates worry.
Which then creates demand for more coverage.
And that new coverage heightens public fear even more, which puts pressure on politicians to do something. So what might have been a minor manageable risk gets amplified into this national obsession, leading to huge and sometimes really inefficient government responses. And if we look even deeper inside System 1, it gets even stranger. You realize just how much we're influenced by things we're not even aware of. This is a power of priming.
Where an idea or an action can be triggered by some stimulus you didn't even consciously register.
Right. The classic experiment here is the Florida effect.
This is the one where they showed college students words related to being old.
Exactly. As part of a totally separate task, they were exposed to words like Florida, gray, forgetful, and afterwards, they unconsciously walked much, much slower down the hallway.
And they had no idea why.
None of them had a clue that the words had influenced their physical behavior. It's a little spooky.
And it gets even darker when you start priming with money.
Oh, the money priming experiments are. They're really troubling. They found that people who were subtly reminded of money, maybe they just saw a screensaver with dollar bills on it, they became much more independent, they'd work longer on a hard problem.
But there was a big downside.
A huge one. They also became demonstrably more selfish, more socially detached. They were less willing to help a stranger who, accidentally dropped a pile of pencils in front of them.
So just the idea of money, even subconsciously, makes us less communal.
It primes individualism at the expense of helping others. It really drives home this idea that we are, in a very real sense, strangers to ourselves.
And System 1, it hates a vacuum. It needs to create a coherent story no matter how little information it has to work with.
Which leads to its main operating rule. What you see is all there is, or WYCID.
WYCID, I like that. It basically means we don't look for what's missing, we just work with what's in front of us.
And that's what creates the halo effect. If you meet someone, let's call her Joan, and you find her really personable, you get a good vibe. Later, someone asks if you think Joan is generous.
I'd probably say yes, even though I have no evidence.
Of course you would. System 1 fills that information gap with a guess that fits your initial positive feeling. It makes the story about Joan feel coherent.
And this drive for coherence can just steamroll basic logic.
Constantly. Which brings us to the conjunction fallacy and the famous Linda the feminist bank teller problem.
Right. So Linda is described in a way that perfectly fits the stereotype of a feminist activist.
A very detailed, compelling description. Then you ask people to choose which is more probable. A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller. A and a D is active in the feminist movement.
And people overwhelmingly choose B.
They do. And logically, that is completely impossible. The group of feminist bank tellers is a subset of the larger group of bank tellers. A subset can never be more probable than the whole set.
But the more detailed story just feels more plausible.
It feels more coherent. And System 1 will choose a plausible story over a probable reality every time.
Okay, so because System 1 is always looking for these causal stories, it really struggles with pure random chance. Which brings us back to where this all started.
Exactly. Our flawed intuition about statistics, it's all captured in what's called the law of small numbers.
Which is the mistaken belief that the law of large numbers, the idea that results even out over thousands of trials, also applies to, like, 5 trials.
Yes, we see a small streak and we think it's a meaningful pattern. We are far too quick to reject the idea that something just happened by luck, and instead, we invent a cause for it.
And this need for a cause makes it almost impossible for us to understand the concept of regression to the mean.
It is exceptionally difficult for our brains to process. Let's talk about the flight instructor story.
Okay.
So this instructor had a firm belief. Whenever he screamed at a cadet for a really terrible maneuver, their next one was better. But whenever he praised a cadet for a brilliant maneuver, their next one was worse.
So he concluded that punishment works and praise is bad. He felt rewarded for being a jerk.
He did, but he was just misinterpreting random fluctuation. A cadet only got screamed at after a performance that was an extreme outlier, probably just random bad luck. They were statistically guaranteed to do better next time, to regress back toward their average, whether he screamed at them or gave them a cookie.
So it had nothing to do with the shouting.
Nothing. And it's the exact same mechanism that explains the famous Sports Illustrated jinx.
Oh, right. An athlete gets on the cover after an amazing performance.
An exceptionally lucky peak performance, and their next performance is just closer to their normal average.
Yeah.
But it looks like a jinx. It's just regression.
Finally, we have to talk about anchoring. This one is, I think, the most unsettling. The idea that just hearing a number, even a ridiculous one, can bias your answer.
It's deeply unsettling because it's so powerful and we're so unaware of it. In the experiments, they'd ask people a question like, did Gandhi die before or after age 144?
An obviously absurd number.
Totally absurd. But that number acts as an anchor. When they were then asked to estimate his actual age of death, that group gave much, much higher estimates than a group that had been given a low anchor. System 1 grabs that irrelevant number and uses it to frame the possibilities.
And this isn't just a lab trick.
No way. They've shown that professional real estate agents who swear they're objective are still massively influenced by the listing price of a house when they estimate its true value. They deny it, but the data proves it. The effect is unconscious and it is incredibly robust.
So, after all of this, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener? I think it's that you are, in a lot of ways, a stranger to yourself.
That's a great way to put it. Your System 1 is constantly building this coherent, plausible story about the world based on, incomplete and often biased information.
And your System 2, because it's lazy and gets tired, it accepts that story most of the time without question.
And we've seen how hard it is to learn from experience, especially with these statistical facts. You can learn the logic of base rates or regression, you can recite it, but it rarely stops that first powerful intuitive impulse.
But there is a final provocative thought here about how we actually do learn. It turns out that while surprising statistics don't really change our minds,
Hmm.
a single surprising individual case can.
That's the key. In studies about helping behavior, telling people the low rate of helping in a situation didn't change their views. They thought, oh, that applies to other people, not me. But when they showed students interviews of two genuinely nice, relatable people who had failed to help someone having a seizure, everything changed. They immediately generalized from that one case and updated their entire understanding of how situational pressure works.
So true learning isn't just about knowing the statistic. It's about seeing that one undeniable failure of logic in a way that you can't ignore.
You have to force that single incongruous case, that shocking moment of bias, into System 1's narrative. You have to make the error itself into an unforgettable story.
Because knowing the logic just isn't enough. You have to recognize the impulse in the moment and build an emotional story around why it's wrong.
It's the only way to get your rational self to win the argument with that stranger inside your head.
Indeed. We look forward to you joining us next time for another deep dive.